an engaging instructor devoted to exploring the scientific secrets of human memory. Peter M. Vishton is Associate Professor of Psychology at the College of William and Mary. He received his BA in Psychology and Computer Science from Swarthmore College and his PhD in Psychology and Cognitive Science from Cornell University. Professor Vishton has served as Program Director for Developmental and Learning Sciences at the National Science Foundation. His research interests include perception and motor systems of the brain. He has been published in the top journals in the field of psychology, including Science, Psychological Science, the Journal of Experimental Child Psychology, and Experimental Brain Research.
Imagine this. You're an early hunter-gatherer, starting your day searching some bushes for berries. Getting these berries is critical to your survival, so you're going to check the bushes, even though you know an important fact. There are lions hiding in some of the bushes. If you stick your head into a bush that has a lion in it, that's it for you. End of the line. Okay, so here is the critical information. This knowledge will save your life when you're searching those bushes. You should avoid bush numbers 9, 2, 19, 6, 20, 4, 17, 7, 10, 24, 16, and 22. Got it? It's important, so let's try again. 9, 2, 19, 6, 20, 4, 17, 7, 10, 24, 16, and 22. Okay, go ahead. Find enough berries to feed your family and survive the winter, and don't get eaten. How confident do you feel? Did you remember all of those numbers? If you're like most people, then you probably remembered a few, but not all of them. No matter how much you wanted to remember them, your brain is just not built for it. What it is built for is spatial information. Okay, here are all the lions. Here's the same information. The same thing conveyed by reading you that list of numbers. You may note that there are lions in each of the numbered spots: 9, 2, 19, 6, 20, 4, 17, 7, 10, 24, 16, and 22. Just like I said, if you look at this image for a few seconds, however, you will be able to remember where all of the lions are located. It really is the same information, but it's converted into a different format. The number labels are replaced by locations in space. Your brain also probably notices a spatial pattern here. All of the lion bushes are right next to one of the four corners of the space. By converting this information into a location-based format, our memory is suddenly able to perform much, much better. Part of that remembering locations is based on an excellent ability that humans possess to remember natural images. You should be able to look at the world around you, taking in some image through your eyes, and recognize if you've seen it before or not. It's also important that this recognition process function very quickly. More than a few seconds and a lion might be chasing after you. I'm Peter Vishton, and I've been fascinated with human cognition and the brain for more than 2 decades now. I've done many experiments on perception and action control, and much of my research focuses on cognitive development in infants and children. Since the beginning of my time studying psychology, however, I've also been interested in memory. For one thing, memory is present in almost everything that we do. Without it, we would exist in a sort of vacuum. Without memory, we could perceive things and do things, but we wouldn't have a sense of how our lives exist in a continuous, ongoing fashion. Memory is the thing that links us to our past. Our understanding of our memory also links us to the future. It enables us to plan and reason with an understanding that we'll have access to those plans and conclusions in the future. While I'm talking about myself, I should also mention that I don't have an especially good memory. I forget birthdays, where I left my car keys, sometimes where I parked my car. Perhaps my fascination with memory originally arose from some concern about this. That said, when I do choose to encode something in my mind, I'm very good at it. Even with my relatively limited memory capacity, I'll be showing off some tricks that I think are rather impressive, at least until I show you how they're done. Human memory is a truly amazing thing. Just think about this. You experience these sounds that I'm making, these ideas that I'm explaining, and they somehow stick in your head. Your brain, with its millions of neurons and trillions of synaptic connections between those neurons, is always changing itself to store the things you remember, the things you experience. You can't feel it, but it's changing right now. As amazing as human memory is, there are times when it seems to fail us. Why is that? Why can we remember some things with perfect clarity and fidelity, and yet forget other things, like where we left our keys or the date of a good friend's birthday? We often forget these things, and not because we don't really want to remember them. They just don't stick. Why? In this course, I'll argue that, with rare exceptions, all humans have an amazing memory capacity. Scientific research on memory has established this. The real problem is that our brains were not really built for the types of memory challenges that we give them in our classrooms, offices, and throughout our everyday lives. The central trick to enhancing the power of your memory is to transform things that are hard to remember into things that are easy for your brain to encode and later recall. There's a field of science called evolutionary psychology that makes a strong and not uncontroversial assertion. Modern humans, they claim, go through their lives with the brains of primitive cave people. You, they claim, have the brain of a primitive, early human who lived hundreds of thousands of years ago. Evolutionary psychologists start, of course, with the notion that humans evolved from ancestral species through a process of selective adaptation, a random mutation combined with a survival of the fittest. According to the standard theory, this is how our species, and all species, developed. Another thing that's central to the evolutionary psychologist's position is the notion that evolution is very, very slow. Our species first walked the earth, according to most theories, about 200,000 years ago, somewhere in East Africa. For the vast majority of those 200,000 years, humans survived by hunting and gathering food. Until relatively recently, humans didn't work in offices, with computers, or even with books. We didn't have to remember phone numbers, social security numbers, PIN codes. Our brains didn't evolve to process that type of information, and so they aren't especially good at it. Our species has always been social, so remembering faces and names has always mattered. But only recently have we started living in social groups bigger than a few dozen people. Our brains didn't evolve to represent the names and faces of 7,000 colleagues, neighbors, and Facebook friends, and so they aren't very good at it. The human brain, your human brain, is very good at what it does. So what does it do? If you wanted to build the perfect hunter-gatherer brain, the perfect hunter-gatherer information processing machine, what should you build in? A few things come to mind right away. If you're going to forage for food and avoid predators, you'd better be able to remember locations really, really well. Is this a place I've searched before now? Was there good food here in the past? Was there a lion hiding behind that bush over there? What other areas near here might also be good places to look for food? Your brain should be very good at remembering how information is related to particular locations within the environment. And it is. Your brain's very, very impressive with this sort of memory, as long as you present that information in the right format. The lion avoidance game that we played at the beginning of this session provides some good evidence for that. Okay, so you have a caveman brain that's good at remembering images. It's much less good at encoding arbitrary information, like the things on your shopping list. Why would that be? Imagine you have a computer with a powerful memory, able to store hundreds of gigabytes of information. In order for that computer to store any information, it first has to be coded into a particular digital format, likely a long string of ones and zeros, the bits of the information. You can hold up printed images to a computer all you want, but unless they're encoded into a format that the computer is designed to use, then there will be no memory at all. The same is true for humans. The best way to enhance your memory is to encode the things you want to remember, into the format that your caveman brain is good at processing. For the rest of this session, I'll be talking a little bit more about how memory works. I want to give you a quick memory test that I'm confident you'll ace. In so doing, I hope to convince you that your memory, at least for certain types of material, is very fast and tremendously accurate. The methods that I'll describe for memory improvement in this course are mostly about encoding things that are hard to remember, for instance, dates, names, and numbers, into the types of things that are easy to remember, things like images and locations. When the time comes to remember some information, you recall the easy-to-remember stuff and just decode it back into the original format. After our memory test, we'll then start that process of learning to encode things into your brain in a format that it likes to use. The first technique is one of the most basic number-to-sound encoding systems. It's called the major system. I'll talk about how you can use it to encode numbers into words and then into images that you can store very easily in your memory. Images that you can recall whenever you like and then decode back into the numbers that you'd like to be able to remember. Finally, at the end of this session, I'll give you a little homework for next time. Okay, let's move on to convincing you that your memory is amazing. In a moment, you'll see a sequence of images for a few seconds apiece. I want you to watch those images. I'll be testing you on your memory for them, but there's really no need for you to make any special effort to encode them into your brain. You'll see 20 images for a few seconds apiece. As soon as they start, just please make sure to keep looking at the screen. I'm now going to show you another sequence of images. This time, there will be 2 images on the screen at once. One of them will be taken from the sequence of images that you just watched. The other will be new. Your task is to try to identify which one is the image that was in the presentation sequence a few moments ago and which one is new. If this were a real experiment, we would ask you to press one button on a keyboard if you recognize the image on the left, and another key if you recognize the image on the right. For our purposes, you can just raise your right finger for the right and your left finger for the left. I encourage you, however, to actually do that, as opposed to simply watching the images. After a few seconds, a text label will indicate which one of these images is the new image and which was the old image from the original presentation sequence. How did you do? If you watched those initial images, you almost certainly did very well on the test, recognizing 19 or even 20 correctly. The human brain is simply magnificent at this image recognition task. You only saw that initial sequence of images for a few seconds apiece. During that time, you encoded the image into your memory in such a way that when you saw the image again, you recognized it as something that was already stored in your mind. In the test sequence, I made a point of putting in two images that you've likely seen in the past, an image of the Mona Lisa and an image of Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. Your task, of course, was not to just note images that you'd seen at some time in the past, but rather to pick out images that you saw in the presentation sequence just prior to the test. I think it's really notable here that we can do that pretty effortlessly. You don't just accurately, quickly, almost perfectly recognize images. You can recognize, with some impressive accuracy, when and where those images were seen. Many experiments have been run on human image memory like this. Several really fascinating things are worth noting about them. The first is that these image memories you've created are very durable. If you were to go away and come back to this test in 24 hours or even a week, you would still perform very well. Our brains are affected in long-lasting ways by experiences that we have all the time. Even right now, as you're listening to the things I'm saying, the physical structure of your brain is being modified. These changes, once they're made, can be very long-lasting. They certainly are with images that you've seen. Another aspect of these experiments on image memory is worth noting here. In many ways, this is the most remarkable. I've noted that you can remember images even with just very little exposure. A few seconds is enough. I've noted that these memories can be very long-lasting. This third thing has to do with how many images you can remember. I showed you and tested your recognition of 20 images. In the interest of time, I didn't show you more than 20, but I could have. If I'd shown you 100 images, the results would have been the same. You would have encoded the 100 images and been almost perfectly able to recognize any of them. If I'd shown you 1,000 images, the story would still be the same. In one recent experiment conducted at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, participants watched 3,000 images for about 3 seconds apiece. That's about 2.5 hours of just watching a very, very long slideshow. The experimenters then presented these participants with pairs of images. One of the images was one that had been in the original marathon slideshow, and one of the images was new. The participants tried to pick out which was the familiar image and which was the new one, just like the task you did. The study participants had very average memories based on other testing that was done, probably very similar to yours. They were able to correctly pick out the correct image 92% of the time. Even in cases where an image was specifically selected to be similar to one of those demonstration images, with, for instance, many of the same objects placed in it, participants still identified it as a new image 88% of the time. The human brain is simply very, very good at encoding and later recognizing images. It seems to be something that we're just built to do. If you're like many people, you may feel that your memory is very limited, but trust me, it is remarkable. We may have trouble remembering phone numbers and names at times. We may have trouble remembering where we left our keys. We may even have trouble remembering facts for an exam, even though we studied extensively for it. All of these failings, however, are not due to limitations of our brain to encode and store information. We all have this capacity to a remarkable level. The trick of improving our memory performance, essentially all of the techniques that I'll teach you about in this course, revolve around a single goal. If you want to remember something, both accurately and for a long time, you need to take the information that you want to remember and transform it into something that's easy for your brain to remember, something like an image. Later, when you want to recall the information, you recall the image and then decode it back into the information that you wanted to remember in the first place. And voila, rapid, accurate, seemingly unlimited recall. Let's begin that process now. We live in a world in which we're asked to remember many numbers. phone numbers, birth dates, social security and ID numbers, locker combinations, and one of my nemesis, the number of the parking lot zone where I parked my car at the airport. Our brains, my brain too, are really good at remembering things, but numbers, not so much. How can we convert hard-to-remember numbers into easy-to-remember images? There have been many systems developed for this. Some of them are extremely complex. I want to start with a classic, a relatively simple one called the major system. It was developed by Johann Winckelmann in 1648. When you want to encode numbers into your memory, you'll be able to do that quickly, but you first need to add some tools to your mental toolkit. For next time, I want you to do some homework. There won't be a quiz, not a graded one anyway, but there will be some demonstrations that you can do yourself if you just invest an hour or so memorizing that major system. The major system converts numbers into letters, sounds actually. Each digit from 0 to 9 gets a particular phonetic sound. 0 gets S or S. 1 gets T or D, T or D. 2 gets N. 3 gets M. 4 gets R. 5, L. 6 gets a choice of either sh or ch. 7, K or G. 8, F or V. And 9, P or B. I suggest making flashcards. On one side of these, put the numbers from 0 to 9. On the other, the major system sounds that go with them. You can just write them down without the flashcards, but cards have a great characteristic to them for studying these. They can be shuffled. You'll need to recall the digits in many different orders, so you'll need to study them that way. You'll want to study these 10 letter-to-sound connections such that if I were to say any digit, you would instantly be able to come up with the letter or sound, or letters or sounds, that go with that particular number. You also have to be able to go in the other direction. That's just as important, actually. If I were to give you a particular letter or sound, you should be able to instantly, or at least very quickly, tell me which number goes with it. Like many homework assignments, this one won't be especially fun, but trust me, it will pay off in the next session. With this information and a little practice, you'll be able to memorize and remember any number, up to 10 digits, in just a few moments. And the best part is that once you have them memorized as an image, you'll essentially never forget them. It might be worth stopping here for a moment to talk about the limitless capacity of your memory. I'm a fan of Sherlock Holmes, as imagined and described by the great author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. These books have great stories, and the detail with which they're imagined and written is actually endlessly impressive. Sir Arthur knew a lot about a lot of things, but his knowledge of memory seems to have been largely incorrect. Sherlock Holmes occasionally described his thinking to Watson, and anyone else who would listen, but mostly to Watson. In one story, A Study in Scarlet, he described his memory as being very good, but also very carefully governed so as not to overfill it. In the story, Watson had just discovered that Sherlock, as smart as he was, didn't understand the basic mechanics of the movements of the planets in our solar system. Holmes explained that he'd heard of this information, but then chosen to forget it, so as to save space for other, more useful information that would help with his detective work. "You see," he explained, "I consider that a man's brain originally is like a little empty attic, and you have to stock it with such furniture as you choose." Holmes then describes this attic analogy in great detail, arguing that he intentionally chooses to forget things all the time so as not to overfill his mental attic. "Depend upon it, there comes a time when for every addition of knowledge, you forget something that you knew before." This is a lovely little passage, but it's also completely wrong. Science has repeatedly tested the capacity of human long-term memory, and the result has always been the same. There seems to be no upper limit. It's never the case that, in order to learn something new, you must forget something else that you already know. We do forget things, of course. Sometimes things we learn, like the new phone number of our new home, can interfere with older knowledge, like our memory for the old phone number at our old home. But when associations are linked with new contexts, new times and events, we just don't run out of memory space. We just don't run out of it. This is remarkable just to know, I think, but it has a direct relevance for this course. I'm going to be asking you to practice memorizing a wide range of different things that probably aren't especially important to you. Don't worry, however. I wouldn't dream of doing this if it would somehow use up your limited memory resources. Those resources, as far as we can tell, are unlimited. Okay, so I've given you your homework of memorizing those number to sound associations. Let me use our last few minutes here to demonstrate how we're going to be using them. Let me describe how I would memorize a string of important numbers. Let's say I learn in a passing conversation that my friend Sebastian's birthday is December 13th, 1994. I'd like to be able to remember that when it comes up in the future. Now, I could just say it over and over to myself, but as soon as I'm distracted by something else, it would be gone. I'm unlikely to be able to remember it unless I can encode it in some meaningful, easy-to-remember format. I'll use the major system to accomplish that. Okay, December 13, 1994 can be thought of as 12-13-94. I just have to remember those 6 digits, those 3 numbers, and I'm all set. With the major system, those 3 pairs of numbers become TN, DM, and FR. With the major system, you start with these consonant sounds and then intersperse vowels and other non-major system consonants to make words of items that you can easily imagine. So let's start with TN. Do any words come to mind for you? Tin, tangle, tone, tiny. Actually, tiny might not be a good word to use here. I could certainly imagine something that is tiny, but that could get confusing later when I have to remember letters for the adjective tiny rather than letters for the noun to which tiny refers. The best words for this type of task are those that have a clear, imaginable object directly associated with them. For me, TN sounds like ton. I imagine a giant metal weight with the words 1 ton written on the side. How about DM? Dome, dimple, dummy, dimmer. Notice that with dimmer, there's an extra sound there. D goes with the number 1, M goes with the number 3, but there's still that R sound at the end of dimmer. That could go with the number 4. Later on, that might be confusing for me. When I'm trying to decode dimmer, I'd have to remember, do I want 1-3 or 1-3-4? I could use dimmer, as in dimmer switch here, as long as I've decided that I'm always going to use 2 digits per object. As long as I'm consistent about that with dates, which I am, I'll be fine. Actually, DM makes me think of dime. I imagine a giant balance scale now with the 1 ton weight on one side and a giant dime on the other side. Apparently, my giant dime weighs a ton because that's why the scale is balancing. How about FR? Our last pair of sounds represents that year of 94. Friar, fair, forest, fork. There are a lot of words that you could think of here. This one actually makes me think of fire. Now I have the last big piece of my image. I imagine my friend Sebastian holding a raging campfire in his hands. In my imagination, this does not hurt or even bother him. He's holding the fire, standing next to the balance scale, saying, "This fire weighs 1 ton also." One last thing. I have a particular arrangement of these items in my mental image from left to right. The 1 ton weight is on the left side of the balance. The giant dime is on the right side of the balance. And there's Sebastian a little further to the right holding his fire. In front of the whole arrangement is one more thing. It's a key that I always use for birth date memories, a giant birthday cake. That's a pretty memorable image for me. It might not be for you, but with some practice, you can take any set of numbers and generate one for yourself. Once you've memorized those number to sound associations, that's fairly easy. This image will stick with me for a long time. Actually, I think it will stick with me pretty much forever. This is like one of those images that we watched in the image memory test. It just sticks. So fast forward a few weeks or months. What's Sebastian's birthday? When is it? The image comes back really easily. 1 ton, dime, and fire. That becomes ton, TN, dime, DM, and fire, FR. That becomes 121394. December 13th, 1994. Got it. In this session, I hope I've convinced you that you have a remarkable memory ability, just as remarkable as people who seem to effortlessly remember things. The only difference between people with an excellent memory and those with an average memory is how they use it. I've also taught you how to use your own memory better, to encode arbitrary numerical information. You need to memorize those major system links, but as soon as you do, you'll be able to, and that's easy. You'll have a tremendous new tool at your disposal. Over these 6 sessions, we'll discuss everyday memory problems that people have and how to solve them. We'll also explore the science behind why those solutions work. In the next session, we'll do some more practice with the major system. Once you get the basic links down, you should start to practice encoding things right away. Ask someone what their birthday is, and then create an image to go with it. If your driver's license is all numbers, memorize it. Do the same with your license plate if you can. We'll also talk about the method of loci next time. This is a powerful method for remembering lists of items. The method of loci can also be used in combination with the major system to encode some rather impressive amounts of information. In the meantime, get studying. I look forward to seeing you in your newly turbocharged memory when we start the next session. Happy studying.